He panicked when the woman he left pregnant walked on stage holding triplets and the hand of her billionaire boss. Hey, beautiful souls, welcome back to Alcote Stories, where emotions speak louder than words. Before we dive into today's heart-shaking tale, I've got a question for you. Have you ever watched someone walk away from a love they didn't value only to regret it when it was too late? Because what you're about to witness is a story of betrayal, redemption, and a black queen's rise from pain to power. A millionaire thought he could erase his past, but she returned, not with bitterness, but with triplets who carry his face, and a new man who carries her heart. So grab your tissues, sit back, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And hey, what time is it where you are right now? Let's connect. Ethan Carlisle stood before a grand altar draped in white roses and wealth, his tailored suit hugging a body sculpted by status, not sincerity, his jaw tight beneath the weight of expectation rather than affection. Cameras flashed, guests applauded, but inside he felt none of the joy that typically filled a groom's heart. Instead, a storm of resistance brewed beneath his polished exterior. Across from him stood Amara Johnson, her skin radiant like polished bronze under the chandelier's light, her deep brown eyes searching his with silent hope, a bouquet trembling slightly in her hand, as if sensing the storm behind his smile. She was everything he never expected: poised, intelligent, soft-spoken yet strong, but none of that seemed to matter to Ethan, who had been raised to value complexion over character. This wasn't love. Not to him. This was business, family honor, an unwanted merger dressed in lace and tradition. His mother had begged him to marry someone with grace, someone with values, someone like Amara, while his father demanded the media see the Carlisle name aligned with charity, inclusion, and progressive values. So Ethan obeyed. He said, "I do not to Amara, but to reputation." On their wedding night, he whispered fake sweet nothings against her shoulder, his lips brushing hers with studied tenderness, his arms wrapping around her like an actor rehearsing a scene he would rather not be in. Yet Amara gave herself completely, heart, soul, vulnerability, believing that maybe, just maybe, his affection was real. In those early days, he brought her breakfast in bed, drew her a bath scented with jasmine, left love notes on her pillow in perfect cursive, and smiled at her as if the world stood still when she walked into the room. He even told her, "Maybe you're not like the others," a phrase that haunted her later when she realized it wasn't a compliment, but a comparison laced with quiet prejudice. Ethan took her hand at public events and danced with her beneath chandeliers while silently scanning the room to gauge who was watching. Amara, unaware of his internal shame, grew into the role of wife with grace, cooking his favorite meals, preparing his schedule, and waiting each night by the door to welcome him home. Her laughter filled the halls of their luxury home, decorating the silence he otherwise drowned in scotch and silence. She decorated his office with framed quotes about love and loyalty, thinking he'd smile when he read them. He never did. She brought his lunch to work one day, only to see him panic when colleagues approached, quickly telling them she was a friend from church, crushing her spirit in front of strangers. Still, she didn't complain. She stayed. She loved him. But slowly, Ethan began to pull away. It started with late meetings and cold shoulders. The morning kisses stopped, replaced by quick nods and distracted glances at his phone. The bathtub stayed dry, the notes vanished, and his warmth retreated like the sun behind dark clouds. When she reached for him at night, he turned away, citing stress, deadlines, and fatigue. Amara began to count the minutes he spent in silence, the way he never looked at her when she spoke, the forced smiles, the distant hugs. Her questions went unanswered. Her touches felt unwanted. Once, she asked if he still loved her, and he replied with a sigh, "You overthink everything." Her heart broke in silence. She cried in the shower so he wouldn't see. She wore dresses he once loved, and waited for a compliment that never came. She made his favorite meal, honey-glazed salmon with roasted asparagus, and he ate in silence, scrolling through his phone, then left the table without a word. She sat alone, her plate untouched, her eyes wet. She missed him, even while he sat across from her. In public, he still held her hand, but it felt like a performance, Behind closed doors, he avoided eye contact. He started staying out late, first once a week, then 3 times, then every night. Meetings, he said. Conferences. Just tired. But she smelled perfume on his shirts that wasn't hers. She found hotel receipts in his coat pocket, room service for 2. When she confronted him, he looked through her like she was glass and said, "Don't be dramatic." Amara began to write in a journal at night, trying to keep herself sane. Her entries were filled with questions. What did I do wrong? Was I not enough? But no answers came. She still made the bed every morning, still smiled when he walked through the door, still whispered, "I love you," into the darkness, even when she knew he was awake and pretending to sleep. She called her mother once, but lied and said, "We're happy." She didn't want pity. She just wanted her husband back. But Ethan had already started disappearing from her world long before she realized it. Her heart kept chasing him while he chased other pleasures. And yet, through all the emotional abandonment, she remained hopeful until the day his mask dropped completely. One morning, without explanation, he threw her favorite photo frame of their wedding day into the trash, muttering, "This was never supposed to happen." She stared at the broken glass on the floor, feeling like it mirrored, her shattered, ignored, unwanted. That day something shifted in her. Her eyes, once full of stars, dimmed. She stopped setting his place at dinner. She stopped asking him when he'd be home. She stopped hoping he'd touch her like he used to. The marriage he never wanted had become the prison she couldn't escape. And she didn't know it yet. But within her, growing quietly, beating with life, was the love he would one day beg to claim. The days that followed the shattered photo felt like a long, slow unraveling of something Amara once called love. Ethan no longer offered explanations, not even lies, just silence and absence that bled into her soul like ink on fragile paper. The dinner table became her quiet battleground, 2 plates set, candles flickering, food growing cold as she stared at the ticking clock and prayed his footsteps would echo down the hall. But they never did. Her phone would buzz occasionally with a 1-line text, "Late meeting, don't wait," each word slicing deeper than the last. She wore her prettiest scarf one evening, the red one he once said made her eyes glow. But he came home hours past midnight, reeking of liquor and cologne that didn't belong to her. She pretended to be asleep as he stumbled past her, her heart screaming questions her mouth couldn't ask. The next morning, she made pancakes with strawberries, his favorite, and he didn't even glance at the plate. He left with his briefcase and a quick, "Don't forget to water the plants." No kiss, no warmth, just a man who treated her like background noise. Her body ached for affection, her soul for connection, but Ethan had become a ghost that slept in her bed, yet never touched her. When she tried to sit beside him on the couch, he'd shift away slightly, eyes glued to his phone, laughing at something she was never part of. He no longer asked how her day was or what book she was reading. He didn't notice when she stopped wearing makeup or when she started losing weight from skipped meals and sleepless nights. She became invisible in her own home, a shadow, trailing a man who no longer saw her. At night, she'd sit by the window with a blanket around her shoulders, staring at the stars and wondering if somewhere the woman he was with now was laughing at her pain. Ethan's social media began to tell a story she wasn't in: photos at rooftop events, exclusive wine tastings, golf courses, and luxury yachts, all with people who looked like him, lived like him, smiled like they belonged. Not once did she see herself reflected in those images. Not once did he mention her. She stopped asking where he was going. The lies hurt more than the silence. On their 3-month anniversary, she cooked a candlelit dinner and wore the white dress from their honeymoon. She even played their first slow song on a speaker and waited. He came home at 2 a.m., drunk and laughing on the phone with someone named Savannah. Amara stood in the hallway, clutching the hem of her dress, her eyes drowning in betrayal. He looked at her briefly, smirked, and walked into the bedroom without a word. She sat on the floor that night, hands trembling, heart aching, mind spiraling. Was I just a checklist? A token for image? A temporary placeholder until he found someone he truly wanted? She thought, burying her face in her hands. She didn't cry loudly anymore, just quiet tears that rolled into her pillow, unnoticed and unshared. Her students at school began to ask if she was okay. She smiled at them and said, "Just tired," even though she was breaking inside. She started journaling again, this time writing letters she never intended to send. "Dear Ethan," she wrote, "do you remember how you used to look at me like I mattered?" But each entry ended with silence, just like their conversations. She tried once more, baking him a birthday cake from scratch. He didn't come home. He didn't even remember it was his birthday. The cake stayed untouched on the kitchen counter until it dried up like her hope. She began sleeping with the bedroom door locked, not out of fear, but to separate herself from the emptiness that now filled the space where love used to live. She sang lullabies to herself just to fall asleep. She spoke to the mirror to remind herself she still existed. One evening, she heard him on the phone in his office, laughing gently, using a voice she hadn't heard in months, the voice he used to reserve for her. He said the words, "She doesn't even try anymore," and her knees gave out in the hallway. She crawled into the bathroom, locked the door, and slid down the wall, her chest heaving with the kind of pain that doesn't make a sound. She stayed there for hours, curled on the floor, numb. The next morning, she greeted him with coffee, as usual, because if nothing else, she would keep her dignity. But when he barely glanced at her and walked away, something inside her shifted. She no longer tried to make him see her. She began to see herself. She bought herself flowers one day, placed them on the table, and whispered, "I deserve to be loved." But every time she looked at Ethan, who came and went like a stranger, she wondered if that love had ever been real. The final straw came one quiet Thursday. She asked him, gently, if he could come to her school's charity event. Her voice trembled with hope. He replied flatly, "I don't have time for things that don't benefit my brand." She nodded, smiled, and walked away. That night, she sat on the floor in the dark dining room, the smell of uneaten dinner filling the silence, and whispered to herself, "Was I just a phase?" The echo of her own voice was the only answer she got. The silence after Amara's whisper hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating, until Ethan shattered it one evening by simply not coming home at all. She sat there, staring at the untouched dinner for one, no longer expecting anything, until her phone lit up with a tabloid notification, not a message from her husband, but a photo. Ethan Carlisle, at a charity gala, tux pressed, hair perfect, lips slightly parted in a smile she hadn't seen in months, standing beside a blonde woman in an emerald gown, her hand boldly resting on his chest. Amara's breath caught in her throat, the room spinning as the article headline burned into her vision. Tech tycoon Ethan Carlisle spotted getting cozy with fashion darling Savannah Grace. She blinked, reading it again, hoping it wasn't real, but it was. Her husband had fallen in love, and it wasn't with her. Days passed, and Ethan made no effort to explain, no apology, no guilt, just distance. He began bringing Savannah's name into casual conversation like a cruel knife twist. Savannah says this. Savannah thinks that, and Amara could feel herself unraveling with every mention. He started coming home smelling like her perfume, his smile returning, but never for Amara. She became a ghost that floated around his mansion, unheard and unwanted, passing by mirrors and barely recognizing the woman she saw. One morning, he placed divorce papers on the kitchen island without a word, like an afterthought. She stared at them in stunned silence, her fingers trembling as she picked them up, each page screaming betrayal in black ink. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan didn't even flinch. He looked her in the eyes with cold indifference and said, "I was never proud of this marriage." The words hit harder than any slap, sharp and merciless. Amara's chest tightened, but she didn't cry in front of him. She walked upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and collapsed onto the floor in silence. She clutched her belly, unsure whether it was pain, rage, or the subtle flutter of life that made her breath hitch. A week later, she watched from the balcony as Ethan packed his bags into his Tesla, Savannah waiting in the passenger seat, smiling like a victor. He didn't look back. Not once. Amara stood quietly behind the curtains, a single tear sliding down her cheek, her hands wrapped protectively around her stomach. She was already carrying a piece of him, but he would never know. She told no one. Not her friends, not her mother, not even herself at times. She just drifted through the days in a haze of heartbreak, barely functioning, her body growing heavier with life while her heart hollowed with grief. She began to feel the weight of her decision pressing on her soul: stay in a house filled with memories or walk away with nothing but dignity and a growing child. The choice hurt either way. She sold her jewelry one piece at a time, gifts Ethan once gave her in those 30 golden days to pay for a small apartment on the edge of town. She packed her books, her favorite mug, and a single photo of her childhood, but left behind the life she thought would be her forever. On her last day in that house, she walked room to room, whispering goodbye to pieces of herself. Goodbye to the hallway where she used to wait. Goodbye to the kitchen that never heard laughter. Goodbye to the bed that only knew cold. When she reached the doorway, she looked back one last time, but there was nothing left to mourn. The Amara who entered that house as a wife was gone. The woman who stepped out was wounded, but not defeated. She walked for blocks, her suitcase dragging behind her, feet swollen, soul aching, and belly cradled by her arms like a fragile secret. Every step was a prayerlet. Me make it. Let me survive. Let this child never feel what I've felt. She found a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, the paint peeling and the heater unreliable, but it was hers. It was peace. She covered her windows with dollar store curtains and used crates for furniture, building a home not with money, but with strength. She taught at a new schoolless pay, longer hours, but her students smiled at her like she mattered. And for a while, that was enough. At night, she'd lie awake, hand on her belly, whispering stories to the baby inside. Stories of strength, of courage, of love that endures, even when it's not returned. She didn't know how she would afford diapers or formula or even a crib, but she knew she would never let this child feel unwanted. She promised them that with every heartbeat, and still, there were nights, broken nights, she clutched her pillow and screamed into it, not for Ethan to return, but for the version of herself she had lost in loving him. There were mornings she stood in front of the mirror, makeup half applied, wondering if she'd ever be seen as beautiful again. But then the baby kicked, and she smiled. She wasn't alone. She was never alone. Something had begun to grow not just in her womb, but in her soul. A fire, a purpose, a quiet, rising roar that whispered, "You are not broken, you are becoming." And in that moment, with her hands resting over her child and her eyes full of something close to hope, Amara finally realized this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. Amara stepped into her new life like a phantom, quietly slipping through cracks where no one would notice her grief, her silence, or her swelling belly. She left no address, no goodbye, and certainly no trace for Ethan to follow, not that he'd ever looked back. She didn't want his pity, nor did she crave explanations or apologies. All she wanted now was air to breathe, strength to stand, and a future for the life blooming inside her. With each passing month, her body changed, while the world around her stayed indifferent. No one offered her a seat on the bus. No one held doors open. No one asked how she was holding up. She found work at a small bookstore by day, organizing dusty shelves and restocking classics she'd once read to Ethan. Each title now, a ghost of who she used to be. In the evenings, she graded papers in the back room of a part-time teaching gig, where underpaid hours met overwhelming expectations, but she endured, because survival didn't ask for comfort. Some nights, she worked front desk at a motel, greeting travelers with a tired smile, while her ankles swelled beneath the desk and her back throbbed from standing too long. She was exhausted, often dizzy, and sometimes sick in the mornings, but she pushed through, whispering promises to her unborn child in dark corners. "We're going to make it, baby. Just hold on a little longer." She never mentioned Ethan's name again, not even in her prayers. He had become a distant blur, a faded scar she refused to reopen. There were no prenatal classes, no baby shower, no ultrasound pictures taped to the fridge. Her maternity clothes were hand-me-downs from a co-worker, and her vitamins were bought with coins saved in a jar labeled Future. When the contractions started, she was alone in her apartment, gripping the kitchen counter as pain sliced through her like lightning. She called a cab and bit her lip the entire ride, refusing to cry in front of the driver, who barely looked her way. At the hospital, she registered herself, filled out forms with shaking hands, and when asked for the father's name, she paused, then simply wrote, "Unknown." The nurses were kind, but rushed. There were no soft voices, no comforting hands, no one waiting in the hallway. Just sterile walls, the beep of machines, and her voice screaming into a pillow as wave after wave of agony consumed her. For hours she fought, not just the pain of labor, but the storm of loneliness, betrayal, and fear crashing inside her. And then quietly, beautifully they came. One by one, her babies entered the world, their cries breaking through the silence like sunlight after endless rain. First, Cairo, strong and fierce, his tiny fists clenched like a warrior. Then Kiana, delicate and wide-eyed, with lips that quivered in wonder. And finally Kamari, silent at first, until Amara pressed him to her chest, and he let out a soft, breathy cry as if to say, "I'm here too." She wept not loudly, but with tears that ran endlessly, soaking the hospital gown as she cradled them all together for the first time. No one came with flowers, no one brought balloons, no husband beamed with pride in the corner. There was just her and Thema, circle of warmth in a cold, forgotten room. The nurse asked for their names, and Amara, with cracked lips and a voice worn by hours of pain, whispered with fierce conviction, "Cairo, because he will conquer. Kiana, because she will carry grace. Kamari, because he is my light in the darkest night." The names weren't just words, they were declarations. She looked down at their faces, so small yet so perfect, and saw pieces of Ethan staring back at her. Blue eyes, the same chin, a familiar nose. But where Ethan had once used power to destroy, these children would rebuild her. She stayed in the hospital for 2 nights, not because she could afford it, but because she couldn't yet face the world with 3 fragile souls depending solely on her. When discharge came, she wrapped them in mismatched blankets, her coat draped across them like armor. She held one in each arm and strapped the third to her chest, every step out of that hospital a testament to resilience. The cab driver sighed at the sight of her with triplets but said nothing, and Amara held her head high, because shame had no place here, not after all she had endured. Back in her apartment, she had no crib, so she lined a dresser drawer with soft towels. She turned her closet into a changing station, used the bathroom sink for baby baths, and learned to swaddle with YouTube tutorials during midnight feedings. Her arms grew strong, not just from carrying them, but from carrying the weight of every silent breakdown, every sleepless night, every decision that no one else would make. She began budgeting every cent, sacrificing meals for diapers, selling her old books for formula, doing side tutoring to keep the lights on. Some nights, when all 3 cried at once and exhaustion blurred her vision, she would sit on the floor with one in each arm and the third in her lap, whispering, "Mommy's here. I've got you. We're going to be okay." And somehow she meant it. Even on the days when she didn't believe it herself, she kept a photo of them taped to her bathroom mirror, reminder not of what she lost, but of what she chose to fight for. And though she vanished from the world Ethan knew, she was rising in the world she was building slowly, painfully, beautifully. Amara Johnson was no longer the woman who waited for love at the door. She was the woman who created life, shielded it, and chose not to look back. The days turned into months, and the months into 5 long years, 5 years of grit, grace, and growing pain that shaped Amara not into a survivor, but into something far more powerful. A woman who rebuilt herself from the ruins of betrayal. The tiny apartment that once echoed with cries and struggle now vibrated with laughter and light. Cairo, strong and protective, often helped rock his siblings to sleep. Kiana, thoughtful and tender, drew pictures of their little family with hearts and stars. And Kamari, the most quiet of them all, clung to Amara's side, as if he remembered every tear she had shed to bring them here. Amara no longer counted days in heartbreak, but in milestones, first words, first steps, first scraped knees. She mastered the chaos of single motherhood, with the kind of quiet strength no one applauded, yet it changed everything. She became more than just a teacher. She was a mentor, a speaker at local events, a woman who empowered other struggling mothers with her story. Word of her impact spread slowly, whispered from classroom to community hall, until it reached the radar of a man whose world was nothing like hers, Donovan West, a billionaire known not for flaunting wealth, but for investing in dreams. When he first met her, it wasn't at a gala or a runway, but at a fundraiser she organized at the local library, where she gave a heartfelt speech about parenting with purpose. He stood in the back, unnoticed, struck not by her beauty first, but by her fire. She didn't beg the room to listen, yet every ear leaned closer. She didn't cry while telling her story, but Donovan felt every invisible wound between her words. After the event, he waited for her outside, unsure why a woman in second-hand heels and a simple blue blouse had shaken something loose in his heart. Their first conversation was short, complimented her voice. She thanked him with a humble nod, but he couldn't forget the way her eyes carried entire galaxies of pain and power. Over time, Donovan found reasons to show up where she was: community events, volunteer projects, even her school's science fair, where Cairo won second prize and proudly yelled, "That's my mom!" That night, Donovan watched as Amara lifted Cairo into her arms and kissed his forehead, laughing with the kind of love that no mansion could manufacture. He realized then he wasn't drawn to her because she needed saving, but because she had already saved herself. When he finally asked her out, it wasn't with grandeur or games. It was simple, sincere. "Would you like to have coffee without a clipboard between us?" She hesitated. Her heart still bore scars, but something in Donovan's gentle tone made her nod. Their first date wasn't in a five-star restaurant, but in a corner cafe, where they spoke about books, dreams, childhood wounds, and the weight of expectations. Amara didn't dress to impress. She wore a soft sweater, and her natural curls pinned back. But Donovan thought she looked like royalty. What moved him most was her laughter, real, unforced, and bubbling up after years of being buried. She didn't flirt. She told truths. She didn't lean on him. She stood tall beside him. And he loved her more with every breath. Slowly, he became part of the children's lives, not as a replacement, but as a presence. He helped Kamari build a cardboard castle, cheered at Kiana's ballet recital, and took Cairo to his first baseball game. The triplets adored him, not because he bought them things, but because he listened, he played, he showed up. Amara watched it all quietly, her heart healing in the smallest of ways. Every time Donovan picked up a crying child without complaint, every time he offered to do dishes after dinner, every time he told her, "You don't have to carry everything alone." She cried one night, not from sadness, but from the unfamiliar weight of being supported. Donovan saw her tears and kissed them away, whispering, "You don't have to be strong all the time, Amara. I see you." No man had ever said that to her. No man had looked at her with awe instead of shame. With him, she felt beautiful again, but not just in body. Beautiful in her spirit, her story, her scars. He never asked about her past unless she offered it. He never judged her pain. Instead, he told her, "Every step you've taken to get here, that's queen behavior." And somehow, those words filled the void left by every insult, every cold glance, every time Ethan had made her feel small. She began to dress brighter, smile wider, dream bigger. She enrolled in a master's program in education. She started a blog for single moms. She built not only a life, but a legacy. And through it all, Donovan stood beside her, proud not to possess her, but to uplift her. When he finally confessed he loved her, he didn't say it in a moment of passion or drama. He said it softly, during a quiet afternoon while folding laundry, as Kiana giggled nearby and Kamari spilled juice on the carpet. He looked at her amidst the beautiful mess and said, "Amara, I love your chaos. I love your quiet. I love every version of you." And for the first time in years, she believed it. She didn't need a savior. She had saved herself. But in Donovan, she found something she never thought she'd feel again: safe, seen, cherished. And as the sun set behind her apartment window that evening, bathing the room in golden light, Amara closed her eyes and whispered, "Maybe this is what rising feels like." As the golden light spilled across the living room and the sound of laughter danced in the background, Amara felt something she hadn't dared to name in years. It was the kind that didn't demand perfection, didn't come wrapped in luxury or grand promises, but bloomed quietly in the middle of small, steady moments. One such moment came on a quiet Sunday morning. Donovan was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with Kamari, while Kiana styled his beard with glitter hair clips and Cairo giggled from behind a tower of building blocks. Amara stood by the doorway, barefoot, coffee in hand, soaking in the joy she had once feared she'd never find again. She didn't know Donovan had been waiting for this day patiently, reverently, until he slipped a folded note onto her nightstand that evening, not with a dramatic speech, not on one knee, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knew what love looked like when it had been tested by fire. The note, written in his steady hand, read, "You are the strength this world needs. Let me protect that strength forever. No ring, no pressure, just a request to journey forward together as partners in healing, in hope, and in heart." Amara read it once, then again, tears filling her eyes, not because of the words alone, but because of the man behind them. She walked into the living room, still holding the note, and nodded silently. Donovan smiled, no questions asked, and wrapped her in an embrace that felt like home. Their wedding wasn't held in a grand cathedral or on some private island, but in a sunlit garden filled with community, the same community Amara had poured herself into for years. It was a multicultural ceremony that felt like a warm embrace from the universe itself. Her students brought hand-picked flowers. Elderly women from the shelter she volunteered at crocheted the table covers. Donovan wore a soft beige sherwani, inspired by Amara's grandfather's African heritage, while she walked down the aisle in a dress stitched with embroidered patterns from cultures both hers and his. There were no elite photographers, no viral hashtags, just real people, real love, and real joy. The triplets stood proudly at the altar in matching outfits, each holding a piece of a handwritten vow from Donovan that they had helped him write. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Cairo blurted out, "You better not," making everyone laugh. Kiana reached for Donovan's hand during the ceremony and whispered, "I'm glad you're my dad now," and Kamari nodded in silent agreement, his shy smile radiating trust. When the vows were exchanged, there wasn't a dry eye among them. Amara's voice trembled as she said, "You loved the parts of me no one ever bothered to see. You loved my children not because you had to, but because you wanted to. And I vow to love you back with everything I am." Donovan, holding her hands, replied, "You taught me that strength isn't loud, it's patient. It shows up in the dark, stays through the storms, and smiles in the morning. I promise to stay." As they sealed their union with a kiss, the crowd erupted in applause, no for the glamour, but for the miracle that two broken stories could create something whole. Afterward, the triplets ran circles around them, calling out, "Mom, Dad, dance!" And Amara, laughing through tears, kicked off her shoes and danced barefoot with Donovan on the grass, her veil flying behind her like a banner of freedom. The music was a mix of cultures: African drums, jazz, gospel, even a little country, and every beat felt like it honored their journey. No one whispered about skin color, no one questioned their love. It was understood, accepted, and celebrated. As the sun set, Donovan lifted Kamari into his arms, Cairo climbed onto his back, and Kiana tugged at his arm, shouting, "My turn!" Amara stood watching them, heart full, her past a distant shadow that no longer held power over her. Later that night, she tucked the kids into bed and returned to the quiet sanctuary of their bedroom. Donovan was waiting, sitting with a cup of tea and that same steady gaze that had never wavered. She sat beside him and whispered, "I used to think I was too broken to be chosen again." He took her hand and said, "You were never broken, you were rising." They didn't need grand gestures, just stillness, just truth. That night, wrapped in warmth and the sound of tiny snores down the hall, Amara whispered to herself, "This is what it feels like, to finally be safe." And for the first time in her life, sleep came without fear, without longing, without painfully peace. As peace settled into Amara's soul like a final piece of a long-lost puzzle across the city, a man who had once walked away from that peace was polishing his ego in the reflection of glass, skyscrapers, and diamond cufflinks. Ethan Carlyle, now 5 years older but just as consumed with image, had wrapped himself in a new life that glittered but felt curiously hollow. His marriage to Savannah Grace had become less a love story and more a photo shoot. They posed well together, their smiles polished for cameras. But beneath the surface, their connection was nothing more than shared ambition and shallow charm. Savannah loved attention, adored the sound of her name next to Ethan's in business columns, and while Ethan admired her aesthetic, her touch never warmed him the way he pretended it did. Still, he paraded her through fundraisers, art auctions, and black-tie galas, convinced the world envied what he had. Then came the envelope, creamy white, gold-embossed, delivered by hand, an invitation to the grand opening of a new child care foundation, backed by a Texas billionaire known for humanitarian investments. Ethan, ever hungry for elite networking, smirked as he read the details. "Perfect," he told Savannah. "This will be the event of the year." He selected his suit days in advance, tailored, sleek, a subtle flex of wealth, and made sure Savannah's stylist found her a dress that would shimmer under the chandelier light. They arrived that night in a black Rolls-Royce, Savannah stepping out like a cover model, Ethan adjusting his cufflinks with that signature arrogance he'd never shed. Inside, the venue sparkled with opulence, crystal chandeliers, white orchids, champagne that cost more than most people's rent. Ethan moved through the crowd like royalty, shaking hands, name-dropping, laughing too loudly, ignoring the quiet looks of those who saw through his charm. "Let me introduce you to my wife," he announced to anyone who'd listen, pulling Savannah close like a trophy. "She's a former model. Gorgeous, isn't she?" She'd giggle on cue, but her eyes always searched the room for the next camera. Ethan soaked in the attention, telling stories of business takeovers, of vacations in Monaco, never once noticing that the buzz around the room wasn't really about him. Something was shifting. There was a hum, a pulse, a tension that made people glance toward the stage more than usual. He caught a few whispered exchanges. "She's really coming," and "Wait till you see who she brought." But he assumed it was about a celebrity or tech tycoon. When the lights dimmed and the spotlight hit the stage, Ethan leaned back smugly, one arm draped over Savannah's chair. The host walked up, voice booming with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's event is not just about charity. It's about transformation, about those who rise when the world tries to bury them. Please welcome the heart behind this foundation, Amara Johnson West." Ethan froze. The name sliced through the room like a knife. He blinked once, twice, certain he'd misheard. But then she appeared, Amara. Graceful, radiant, unrecognizable in the most breathtaking way. Not because she looked different, though time had only deepened her beauty, but because she stood differently. Taller, brighter, unbothered. She wore a floor-length gown in deep sapphire that kissed her skin like royalty, her hair styled in long, flowing curls, her face calm, powerful, and full of life. And beside her, Donovan West, the billionaire Ethan had hoped to impress. The very man holding her hand with a tenderness that screamed love louder than words ever could. And then, as if time hadn't already turned against him, 3 small children followed behind them, triplets. The crowd gasped softly at the resemblance. 3 sets of eyes so familiar, it made Ethan's heart slam against his ribs. Cairo's jawline, Kamari's quiet stare, Kiana's stubborn brow features mirrored Ethan's own like a haunting reflection. Savannah leaned in and whispered, "Wait, do they look like you?" But Ethan couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. His smug posture collapsed into stillness, his confidence draining with every step Amara took across the stage. She stood at the microphone, smiled at the crowd, and began to speak not about pain, but about purpose. "I once believed that being broken meant being unworthy," she said, her voice steady, clear. But the truthissime of us are broken open so the light can find its way in. She shared her journey, not naming him, but Ethan knew every word was a mirror to what he had done. And when she turned to Donovan and said, "This man didn't save me, they walked beside me as I saved myself," the room erupted in applause. Ethan sat frozen in his chair, the champagne in his glass now bitter, his vision blurred not by alcohol, but by the cruel clarity of consequence. For the first time in years, he wasn't the most important person in the room. He was just the man who let a queen slip through his fingers. And now, the world knew exactly who she had become without him. As the final note of the soft piano faded and the spotlight cast a golden hue over the glistening marble floor, time itself seemed to pause. Every head in the room slowly turned toward the grand double doors as they creaked open not with noise, but with reverence and there she was, Amara. Not the woman Ethan remembered, but a vision reborn. She didn't walk in. She arrived, like fire disguised in silk, draped in a golden gown that shimmered with every graceful step. Her braided crown flowed down her back like royalty, and her chin was lifted high not out of arrogance, but from the quiet power of a woman who had bled, broken, and built herself back from dust. In her right hand, Donovan West composed, proud, and beaming with a love so deep it silenced the room without a single word. In her left hand, Kiana, radiant in white lace, her smile the kind that broke and healed hearts all at once. Beside them, Kamari walked with quiet strength, and Cairo, standing tall in a miniature white tux, held his shoulders like a protector in training. The room gasped not just from their beauty, but because truth had just stepped in and made itself visible. Ethan's glass slipped slightly in his hand, his mouth parted in disbelief, heart lurching in confusion and regret all at once. For a second, he forgot where he was. He couldn't hear Savannah whispering beside him. He couldn't hear the murmurs or the scattered applause. All he could see was Amara and the living, breathing proof that everything he threw away had flourished without him. His eyes darted to the children, tracing every curve of their faces, every flicker of expression, and something inside him twisted violently. There was no denying it. Those were his children. The resemblance was merciless. Cairo's eyes held the same stormy blue. Kamari's side smirk mirrored his, and Kiana's stubborn brows could have been cut from his own baby photos. Yet, they looked nothing like him in spirit. They radiated peace, warmth, and joy, the very things he'd stolen from Amara long ago. Now someone else had returned them to her tenfold. Amara stepped onto the stage like a queen reclaiming her throne, not with vengeance, but with grace that disarmed the air. She didn't look at Ethan not once, and that, more than anything, made his insides crumble. To not be seen by her, after everything, was a punishment he hadn't prepared for. Donovan placed his hand gently on the small of her back as she took the mic, and her voice, soft but sure, filled the hall. "I never imagined I'd stand in a room like this, not because I didn't dream, but because there was a time I was taught not to. Taught I wasn't worthy. Taught my skin made me less. That my love wasn't enough. But I stand here with proof that kindness rewrites narratives. That love built on respect and truth survives every storm." The audience erupted into applause, but Ethan's world spun quietly behind it. Savannah shifted in her seat, frowning, sensing the unraveling in her husband. Ethan tried to keep his expression flat, but guilt had a way of rising through skin. Amara went on, introducing each child with pride, telling stories of their laughter, their struggles, and their dreams. "Cairo wants to build schools," she said with a smile. "Kiana wants to write books about brave girls. Kamari wants to be a chef who cooks food that feels like home." Donovan laughed softly and squeezed her hand as she continued. "They are not my weakness, they are my legacy. And they are who they are because someone stepped in not to replace their father, but to love them without question." Ethan flinched. The room clapped again, louder now, but he heard none of it. His gaze stayed locked on the family that should have been his. For the first time in years, he saw Amara not as a memory, not as a mistake, but as the woman he had never truly known. She had bloomed in soil he thought he'd poisoned. She had loved deeper, risen higher, and walked straighter without ever needing to crush him in the process. She didn't seek revenge, simply rose, and it burned. His chest tightened with questions he couldn't voice. Would she even speak to me? Do they know who I am? Could I ever fix this? But even as the thoughts formed, reality answered back, you abandoned them. You made your choice. When the speech ended, the crowd stood in ovation. Donovan kissed Amara's hand as the children hugged her knees. Flashbulbs went off, and Ethan felt like a shadow in a room full of light. Savannah leaned toward him, her voice low and sharp. Why do those kids look like you? But Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't, because in that moment, he wasn't Ethan Carlisle, the powerful CEO. He was just a man drowning in his own silence, staring at the greatest blessing he never deserved, and the only woman he never truly saw, until she walked in like fire and made the whole world notice what he threw away. Ethan couldn't move. His body sat stiff in the velvet chair, but inside, every part of him was unraveling like a thread pulled too tight, too long. The applause thundered around him, but all he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat slamming inside his ears, and the whispered chaos brewing in Savannah's voice as she leaned in closer, eyebrows furrowed, eyes sharp. Are those your kids? She hissed, her voice coated with suspicion and disbelief. Ethan's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes were glued to the stage, to those three children standing so confidently by Amara's side, his former wife, the one he discarded like an old chapterand. Something inside him twisted violently, a cocktail of confusion, denial, and fear. It can't be, he whispered. But even as the words left his mouth, they felt like lies. Lies meant to protect him from the truth, screaming through every detail. Cairo's intense, stormy blue eyes were a reflection Ethan had once seen in a boardroom mirror, full of ambition and fire. Kiana's jawline curved, just like his mother's, but her smirk, the way she tilted her head when amused it, was his. And Kamari, quiet but observant, blinked in that slow, calculating way Ethan always had when reading contracts. The resemblance wasn't just striking, it was undeniable, haunting, merciless. Savannah leaned back, visibly unsettled, her lips curling into suspicion. Ethan, she said more sternly now, you told me your first marriage was a mistake. You said she was manipulative. You said she meant nothing. But Ethan was no longer listening to her. His gaze remained locked on the family he had abandoned, the family he never knew he had. Regret clawed at his insides like broken glass. Did she know she was pregnant when I left? Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't I ask? The weight of every missed question, every dismissed emotion, every cruel word he'd hurled at Amara back then, now buried him alive in this ballroom. He remembered the night he'd thrown the divorce papers at her like they were trash. He remembered the way her hands trembled, how she clutched her belly. Was she carrying them then? His stomach churned. The champagne in his throat soured. His mind flashed through images, Amara, standing at their old apartment window, silent. Amara waiting at the dinner table, alone. Amara whispering, was I just a phase? And now he knew the answer had never been hers to give. He had made her a phase, and she had made his absence into purpose. The crowd moved around him. The event flowed on, but Ethan sat as if trapped underwater, drowning in shame. Donovan stood beside Amara, a steady hand resting on Kamari's back, and when the little boy leaned into his side, something in Ethan broke. That should have been him. He should have been the one teaching Cairo how to tie a tie, reading bedtime stories to Kiana, carrying Kamari when he was too tired to walk. But instead, another man had filled the shoes Ethan never bothered to try on. And not just any billionaire who treated Amara like a queen, who embraced her past without question, who stood on a stage and gave her the world, while Ethan sat in the shadows, watching it slip through his fingers. He looked at Savannah, whose face now held more contempt than confusion. She crossed her arms and whispered, "You lied to me. You didn't just leave her, you left your children." Ethan turned away, throat dry, hands trembling. The mask he wore for years was cracking. The perfect life he had so carefully curated, the image of success and power, it was nothing compared to the raw, radiant truth shining on that stage. He felt like a ghost in his own legacy, a father only by blood, not by presence, not by love. When the event paused for intermission, Ethan stumbled out into the corridor, gasping for air, gripping the edge of a marble pillar like it might hold him together. In the reflection of the glass wall, he saw himself, and for the first time, he hated what he saw. Not the suit, not the wealth, but the man inside it, the coward, the fool, the father who never was. He watched the doors swing open behind him and saw the triplets laugh as Donovan lifted Cairo into the air, Amara's eyes glowing with pride. Ethan's knees buckled slightly. He'd always believed power was about control, dominance, success. But tonight, power had looked like softness, like forgiveness, like a woman rising with her children beside her, and he was no part of it. He thought about approaching them, but the words choked before they could form. What could he say? I didn't know? I didn't care? I thought you didn't matter? Nothing could erase what he'd done. Nothing could reverse the night he let her go without asking what she was carrying. As he stood there, hollowed out by consequence, he realized that the children he helped create would grow up calling another man Dad, and that man had earned it. With every diaper changed, every bedtime story told, every scraped knee kissed, Donovan West had become what Ethan never even tried to be. And as the music resumed inside, Ethan Carlyle, once proud and untouchable, stood quietly in the hallway, a shattered mirror of himself, forced to face the reflection of 3 beautiful children who wore his face but none of his memory. As the ballroom dimmed once more and the celebration began to shift into light music and soft conversations, Ethan stood motionless in the hallway, his reflection still a stranger. But something inside him, guilt, desperation, maybe a flicker of long-buried humanity, pushed him forward. His legs moved almost on instinct, weaving through the crowd like a ghost chasing the living. He spotted her near the garden exit, her laughter floating gently in the air as Donovan wrapped a protective arm around her waist. The triplets ran ahead, giggling as they chased bubbles. For a moment, Ethan almost turned back, but then he saw Amara glance his way. Their eyes locked. Her expression didn't shift, it was poised, unreadable, but her spine straightened like she had braced herself for this moment long ago. She excused herself quietly and walked toward him, heels tapping the marble like soft hammers pounding his chest. He stepped forward, but the words didn't come easy. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally breathed, his voice cracking, raw. His eyes shimmered with something between panic and pain, the kind that came too late. Amara stopped an arm's length away, folding her hands in front of her golden dress, her calm like a storm's eye. "Would it have mattered?" she asked, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of history. "I was just a black woman in your white world, a world you never saw me fit to belong in." Her words landed like stone, and Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not true," he tried to say, but she cut through his denial like a scalpel. "Isn't it?" she replied, softly but sharply. "You married me for convenience. You touched me like I was your secret, then tossed me like shame. When someone whiter, shinier, richer came along, I begged for your attention while carrying your children. And you couldn't even look me in the eye." Ethan's breath caught. "I didn't know you were pregnant," he murmured, pleading now, as if ignorance excused the crime. Amara's eyes flicked with fire. "Because you didn't care to ask. I was disappearing in front of you, and all you saw was your reflection." Her words hit like thunder in a closed room. Ethan took a slow step closer. "I want to know them," he whispered, desperate. "I want to be in their lives. I didn't know, Amara. If I had, She shook her head slowly, pain flickering behind her strength. "You don't get to rewrite this story just because it haunts you now. You weren't there for their first words, their first steps. You weren't there when Kiana had nightmares and begged for a daddy. You weren't there when Kamari had his first fever and I held his body burning against mine alone. You weren't there when Cairo cried because he thought something was wrong with his skin because he didn't see anyone like him on television." Her voice broke slightly, but she didn't let it show. She inhaled and stood taller. "Donovan was. Every time, without question, without blood ties, just love. Ethan's lips trembled, and the hollowness in his eyes deepened. "I'm their father," he said weakly, as if reminding her would change the facts. Amara's gaze didn't flinch. "You're their origin," she replied, cold and clear, "not their foundation." His heart sank under the weight of that truth. She turned slightly to leave, but he reached out, not touching her, just holding his hand up like a man drowning. "Please, just one chance. I'll do anything. I'll go to court if I have to." She spun back, and for the first time, fire cracked through her grace. "You will not drag them into your chaos for your ego. This isn't about your rights. This is about what they need. And what they need is peace." Her voice lowered into something heartbreakingly calm. "You had a chance to love me when I was soft, young, and hopeful. You had a chance to love them when their hearts were blank pages. But now, their story is being written with someone who shows up, stays late, and listens deeply." Ethan swallowed hard, but the lump in his throat refused to move. The night air around them felt colder now. The music behind them was faint. "Do they even know I exist?" he whispered. Amara paused, then nodded slowly. "I never hid the truth, but I also never painted you as a villain. I simply told them you weren't ready." His face collapsed inward. "Can I see them?" he asked again, quieter this time. "One day," she said after a long silence, "but not as the man who abandoned their mother. Only if you come back as someone they can trust, not to leave again." Her eyes softened just a little, enough to sting him with the depth of what he'd broken. She glanced toward the garden, where Donovan held Kiana's hand, while Kamari pointed at fireflies. Cairo waved at her. "I'm happy, Ethan, and not because of revenge. I'm happy because I found light where you left me in darkness. I won't let you dim it again." And with that, she turned and walked back to her family. Her reel won her gown, shimmering like gold forged from pain, and Ethan stood alone once more, surrounded by luxury, choking on regret that no wealth in the world could buy him out of. As Amara's golden gown disappeared into the moonlit garden, Ethan remained frozen where she'd left him, caught between everything he'd ignored and everything he now wanted to grasp. The laughter of the triplets floated in the background like a lullaby from a life he never earned, and his chest ached with the kind of regret that eats a man from the inside out. He couldn't just walk away, not now, not after seeing the truth in their eyes. He rushed forward, down the garden steps, chasing after the remnants of the woman and the children he never bothered to know. "Amara, wait!" he called out, breathless. She turned slowly, her face lit by the soft glow of string lights wrapped around the garden trees. Donovan had stepped away, giving her space but never far enough that she was alone. Ethan's voice cracked as he reached her. "Let me be a father. Please. I made a mistake. I was blind. I was stupid." But Amara held up a trembling hand, cutting through his words like lightning through silence. Her eyes shimmered not with softness, but with the restraint of 1,000 unshed tears. "No," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "You weren't blind. Don't you dare call it blindness. You chose not to see me." Ethan's lips parted, but he couldn't respond. Amara stepped closer, her voice rising in quiet, devastating waves. "I begged for your affection. I begged you to look at me like I was human, like I was worthy of love and not just obligation. But I was never white enough, never polished enough, never acceptable for your country clubs or your photographs. And instead of facing that truth, you buried me under your silence." Ethan looked down, his hands clenched, shame flooding every pore. "I hated myself after you left," Amara continued, voice trembling. "I questioned my value. I questioned my skin. I stood in front of a mirror holding your child and wondered if I'd made it all up, if the kisses, the touches, the soft nights were just my imagination. But they weren't. You used me to prove something to your family, your boardroom, your ego. And the moment I no longer served that purpose, you discarded me." Ethan looked up, tears burning in his eyes. "I didn't know how to love you. I didn't know how to love anyone." Amara's expression twisted with both sorrow and strength. "Then you should have left me alone. Because now there are 3 children walking this earth wondering why the man they look like never came home." Her voice cracked, and she paused, swallowing back years of pain. I watched Kiana wait at the window when it rained. She used to say, "Maybe my real daddy's stuck in the clouds." I couldn't even correct her, because I didn't know how to explain that you walked away before she ever had a chance to love you. Ethan dropped his head into his hands, breath ragged. "Please," he whispered, "I don't want to take anything from you. I just want to be part of their lives. I'll do anything. I'll earn it. Let me just start." Amara blinked slowly, and for the first time, her gaze flickered not with anger, but exhaustion. "Do you think this is about you now becoming a better man?" she asked, her tone brittle. "It's not. It's about the damage that's already done. They're not projects. They're not blank pages waiting for your redemption arc. They are children, whole, loved, and protected. They laugh without needing you. They sleep without crying for you." Donovan didn't fill a gape you never left room for one. Ethan tried to speak, but she continued, voice cracking. "And you didn't just hurt me because I was your wife. You hurt me because I was black. And you made me feel like love was something I had to earn by shrinking myself, by blending in, by hiding the very parts of me that my children now celebrate every day." Her voice dropped into a whisper. "I spent so long trying to be your exception, when I should have known I was never the rule you believed in." Silence fell between them, heavy and honest. Ethan looked up, the weight of every racist, cold, dismissive decision settling like chains around his shoulders. "You're right," he said finally, voice hoarse. "I was racist. I was afraid to love what I didn't understand. And I threw away the only people who could have taught me how." Amara's lips parted in surprise, not expecting him to admit it. But still, she didn't flinch. "It's not my job to heal the man who broke me," she said softly. "But maybe one day, you can be someone they won't run from." Her voice caught, but she turned away, brushing a tear that slipped despite her strength. "Right now they're happy. Don't shatter that." Ethan nodded slowly, defeated. He watched as she walked away, rejoining her husband and children, her golden gown, flickering in the wind like flame. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Carlyle stood not as a CEO, not as a millionaire, not as a man of status, but as a father, with nothing to offer but hope. And the aching silence of too little, far too late. As Amara stepped back into the garden's golden glow, Ethan remained in the shadows still and silent, watching the scene unfold before him like a distant memory he was never truly part of. The laughter of the triplets echoed through the soft night air, a melody too pure for his broken presence. Then Donovan appeared, tall and calm, carrying Cairo effortlessly in his arms, the boy's head resting comfortably against his chest as if it were the safest place in the universe. Kamari raced ahead with a flower crown half crooked on his curly head, and Kiana twirled in her white dress, her feet barely touching the ground as she ran toward her mother. Amara's face lit up not with the kind of strained joy Ethan remembered from their brief marriage, but with peace, with fullness, with freedom. She crouched to embrace her children, her arms wrapping around them like a sanctuary made of love, not duty. Donovan reached her side, brushing a kiss across her temple like it was the most natural thing to do in front of the world. Cairo whispered something in his ear, and Donovan smiled, replying with a soft nod before setting him down so he could rejoin his siblings. Amara glanced over her shoulder then, her eyes locking with Ethan's once again, except this time they weren't cold nor burning with rage. They were simply resolved, tired but certain. "He's not just rich," she said quietly, her voice soft but cutting through the quiet like a thread through silk. "He's wealthy in heart." Her words settled deep in Ethan's chest, heavy and unrelenting. "He teaches them how to love, not hate," she continued, never blinking. "That's what a father is." And with that, she turned away not out of cruelty, but because there was simply nothing left to prove. Ethan stood there, helpless, invisible, in a story he once tried to erase. He watched the way Donovan high-fived Kamari, how Kiana wrapped her arms around his waist, like she did it every hour of every day, how Cairo leaned in to whisper, "You're the best, Dad." It gutted him. He had power, investments, property, recognition in every corner of the corporate world, but in this garden he had nothing. not even the right to kneel and hug the children who mirrored his face. His arms felt like dead weight. His legs wanted to move, to run toward them and scream, "I'm your father, I'm here now." But what good was now, after 5 years of silence? Donovan didn't steal his place. He filled the void Ethan created. Not by force, but by love. By showing up. By knowing Kiana's favorite bedtime story. By teaching Kamari how to tie his shoes. By letting Cairo cry on his shoulder after a bad dream. By being there in all the small, invisible ways Ethan never was. And Ethan realized fatherhood wasn't about DNA. It wasn't about last names or courtroom battles. It was about showing up. Consistently, quietly, gently. Donovan had built bridges where Ethan had left ashes. Ethan's chest tightened as Amara leaned into her husband's embrace, her hand resting lightly over his heart, like it belonged there, like it always had. Her eyes flicked once more toward Ethan, not cruel, not mocking, but final. And that, more than anything, broke him. Not the rejection, not even the truth, but the finality. The clear, undeniable truth that there was no backdoor into redemption that wouldn't cost him more than he was willing to pay. Ethan turned away then, slowly, his hands buried in his pockets, his soul quieter than it had ever been. He walked back into the ballroom that once felt like his kingdom, now just a hall of echoes. Every smile he passed from other guests felt artificial, every handshake meaningless. For the first time, he realized how loud loneliness could be when surrounded by people. In the far corner, Savannah sat stiffly, scrolling on her phone, detached from everything and everyone. She didn't look up. She didn't care. And Ethan suddenly saw his life for what it was, a facade built on fear, status, and walls so high, not even love could climb over. Meanwhile, in the garden, under the stars, a woman he once called unworthy danced with their children beneath lantern light. Married to a man who understood that loving a black woman wasn't a burden, it was a privilege. Ethan wanted to cry, but he couldn't. Not here, not now. His tears were too late, just like he was. And as he slipped out of the event unnoticed, his footsteps echoing through the marble halls, he knew this truth with bitter clarity. Amara had found a love that healed, while he was left alone with the wounds he'd inflicted and deserved to carry. The soft hum of crickets filled the air as the final lanterns flickered over the garden, casting warm light over the closing moments of a night that had changed Ethan Carlisle forever. He had spent the last hour sitting silently on the edge of a fountain, the echo of Amara's voice and Donovan's presence haunting him more than any boardroom betrayal ever could. When he finally stood to leave, fate offered him one last intersection, the kind that divides lives permanently. Amara stepped into the path just ahead, her steps graceful, her silhouette lit by moonlight and dignity. She wasn't rushed, she wasn't angry, she was simply resolved. Ethan called her name, softly at first, as if afraid it would break the air around them. She turned, arms loosely crossed, her golden gown swaying in the breeze. They stood face to face, two people who once shared dreams under the same roof, now oceans apart in spirit. He searched her eyes for a crack, a sliver of hope, anything to undo the damage. But what he found instead was peace, not for him, but for her. "Amara," he breathed, voice laced with desperation. "I know I can't undo it. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but if there's even a shred of your heart that still sees me." She shook her head, gently but firmly. "This isn't about you anymore, Ethan." Her voice was soft but full of thunderous finality. "It never really was. You consumed every moment of our past. My pain, my silence, my tears. But not this." She looked toward the garden where Donovan lifted Kamari into the air, Kiana giggling beside them, and Cairo showing off a dance move near the hedge. "This peace I've found, this joy, I bought it with every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment I chose to believe in myself when you made me feel invisible." Ethan's throat tightened as she stepped closer, her eyes shimmering not with vengeance but clarity. "I forgive you," she whispered. The words struck him like a thunderclap, gentle but earth-shattering. He opened his mouth, stunned, confused. You do?" She nodded. "Yes, But not for you." She paused, taking a breath that seemed to release 5 years of buried storms. "I forgive you so I can walk free, so I can laugh without bitterness, sleep without reliving the betrayal, love without carrying the shadow of your choices. I forgive you so my children never have to carry the burden of my anger. I forgive you so I don't have to spend another day haunted by someone who didn't know how to love me." Ethan's lips trembled, and for a moment he wanted to fall to his knees not to beg, but because he didn't know how to stand in front of someone so much stronger than he'd ever allowed her to be. "But I'm still their father," he murmured. "They still carry my blood." Amara nodded gently. "Yes, and one day when they're ready, when they ask about you, I'll tell them the truth, not to poison them, but to prepare them, because they deserve to know where they came from. But more than that, they deserve to know how far their mother came." Ethan looked down, the weight of her words sinking deeper than any courtroom sentence could. He realized, in that moment, that this wasn't the end of a conversation, it was the end of his place in her story. Amara turned to leave, and as she walked back into the light of her new life, her fingers brushed Donovan's, intertwining without effort, without need for explanation. The children surrounded them like sunlight, each one a testament to resilience, to love, to grace grown through pain. Ethan remained frozen in place, the night swallowing him whole. It wasn't just a wife he'd lost, it was a legacy, a family, a future that could have been built on love, on unity, on redemption. But instead, he chose pride. He chose distance. He chose whiteness over wholeness. And now, as he stood in a garden blooming with the life he once discarded, he realized he'd never been powerful. Not really, because true power wasn't in boardrooms or wealth, it was in holding space for someone else's humanity, and he had failed. As he walked away into the darkness, no hand in his, no laughter to chase, only one truth remained. Amara didn't need him to return. She had already risen. Forgiveness was her gift not to him, but to herself. The golden evening sun cast a soft glow over the foundation stage, where the final speeches of the night were about to begin. Guests returned to their seats beneath the grand canopy, murmurs of the evening's surprises still buzzing in the air. Then the lights dimmed again, not with drama, but reverence's Amara West gracefully stepped up to the microphone, her golden gown shimmering like armor, and her natural crown of curls backlit like a halo. Her hand brushed gently over her chest as she glanced down at her triplets seated in the front row, their eyes wide with admiration, their little hands folded over their laps in pride. Donovan stood beside them, his arm draped protectively behind their chairs, his smile subtle but unshakable. Amara took a breath, not of nervousness, but purpose. The crowd fell into a respectful hush. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm and clear. "When I stood here 5 years ago, I was invisible. Not because I lacked value, but because too many people were too afraid to see it." Her gaze swept across the crowd, some stunned, some deeply moved. "I was told I didn't belong in this room, that my skin was too dark, my presence too loud, my love too uncomfortable." She paused, her voice tightening for just a moment. "But I am here, not because someone opened a door for me, but because I built one with my own hands." The audience leaned in. Amara's eyes glistened as she continued. "Tonight isn't about revenge. It's about rising. It's about standing for every black woman who was underestimated, overlooked, or left behind. It's about rewriting what dignity, strength, and beauty look like in the eyes of the world, and reminding it that we were always worthy." A tear slipped down Kiana's cheek as she looked at her mother in awe. "To every little black girl," Amara said, lifting her chin with grace and defiance, "who's ever been told she's too loud, too dark, too different, look again. We are power. We are beauty. We are worth. We are the blueprint." The crowd stirred, hearts pounding. "We never needed permission to rise," she said with finality, her voice ringing like thunder cloaked in silk. The room erupted in applause, first a wave, then a storm. People stood. Some wiped tears. Some held their daughters' hands tighter. Donovan beamed as he mouthed, "I'm proud of you." And in the back corner, Ethan Carlyle rose too, not out of pride, but out of reverent shame. His hands clapped slowly, sincerely, each sound a confession, a quiet apology to the woman he once deemed unworthy. This time, there was no mockery in his gaze-only awe, and the sting of realization. She hadn't just survived what he did to her. She'd transcended it, and in doing so, she became untouchable, untamed, unforgettable. Amara stepped down from the stage, but not before giving her children one last smile, one that said, "This world will not swallow you, like it tried to swallow me." Cairo stood to hug her. Kamari gave a small salute. Kiana held her hand tightly, as if holding history itself. Donovan reached for her, pulling her gently into his embrace, and kissed her temple without needing words. The moment was hers, and yet it belonged to so many. Ethan watched as she walked away, surrounded by love, lifted by truth, untethered from his shadow. In that moment, he knew her legacy would not be pain but power. And though he could not rewrite the past, he had witnessed the beauty of a future built by the very woman he once underestimated. Amara didn't just take the stages, he owned it, not for recognition, but for redemption, not for attention, but for the little girls watching from the corners of the world who needed to believe they were more than society's lies. That night, a black woman spoke into a microphone and the world finally listened. The applause faded, but her words remained like fire carved into marble. Black, bold, and endlessly beautiful.